Hey guys, in today's video we're going to go over how to use Git. Specifically, we're going to go over how to use Git using SourceTree. SourceTree is a free program available from Atlassian Software. If you just go to sourcetreeapp.com, you can get it there. SourceTree integrates nicely with Bitbucket, which is the service I'll be using for hosting, for the repository hosting. However, you can also use GitHub or GitLab, whatever you'd like the most. So to get started, I'm just going to set up the remote repository first by going to Bitbucket. And you can see I've already done this a couple times. We've got a couple different versions, and what we're actually going to be versioning here, actually I can show you that real quick, because I've got a really basic Pong game, okay, where I can just move these paddles up and down, and it doesn't really do anything fancy, but it's Pong. So we are going to upload this to Git, and we're going to make a couple of changes to it and see how we do this whole thing. So what I want to do is I want to make a new repository on Bitbucket. And it's pretty simple. Once you've made your account and logged in, you'll have a similar view to this, though if you've got a fresh account, you won't see any repositories. We're going to create a repository, and I'm going to make this one public so that I can make this available in the video comments and that you guys can take a look at it. And we'll just call this basic Pong Git demo. You can look a little fancier, I guess. Put some spaces in there. And so once this is set up, if you're using SourceTree, this is all we're going to do for setup. Now, you can use a command line, and to show you just a preview of what that might look like, it would look like this. If you are not a programmer, if you're not savvy with command line, it's a little scary. For most people, SourceTree will be more than enough. So I'm going to hop over to SourceTree now, and there's a couple things I need to do. First, I need to initialize this as a Git repository, okay? And first, I need to set up Unity to do that, and then I will set up SourceTree to recognize this as a Git repository. Or more specifically, I will set up Unity to version control, a couple version control settings you want to activate, and then I'll make a Git repository with SourceTree. So in Unity, it's important that you go to Edit, Project Settings, Editor. Now, this is already... no, it hasn't. Okay, great. Part of this has already been done, but there's two things you need to change, or at least make sure. They might be set to this. It depends. You'll see two things. There's version control and asset serialization. You want to make sure version control is set to visible meta files. And you want to make sure asset serialization is set to force text. It's probably set to mixed by default, but sometimes it can get changed. So let's see. So edit, project settings, editor, visible meta files, and force text. What this does is if I go ahead and I open my file explorer here, you can see that every single one of these files has a .meta file with it. And when meta files were invisible, those weren't there. And what the meta files store is they store the import information. So when I click on one of these images, for example, what we see on the right here, that's what the meta files are storing. And when they're visible, that means we can version them. And it means that people can easily upload new versions of files without having to open the engine and re-import everything. So that's a very powerful feature, and it's important that that's on. Otherwise, version control will not... it's not that it won't work, it's that it will not function the way you'd like it to. You might as well not be using version control. So now that we've got those set up, I want to make sure that that is a Git repository. So over in SourceTree, this is what it looks like after you set it up. You'll have to log into your Atlassian account to get here, but once you do, you can hit this clone/new button. And what you want to do is you want to create a new repository. All right, and we're going to create a new repository in our Pong folder. Okay, so I'm going to just select Pong, right? So it's in my giant... I definitely recommend making a folder where you store your Git repositories. Anyway, I'm going to select Pong, and I'm going to go ahead and hit Create. And this will do some stuff. And if I hop back over to my file browser now and go to the root of the project directory, you'll see it's an invisible folder because it starts with a dot, so you want to make sure that you can see invisible things. But I have a folder called .git. And this stores the versioning history, okay? This stores a bunch of different stuff for us. And so long as this folder's here, we have a Git repository. If you delete the Git folder, you're no longer activating a Git repository. So if for some reason you want to make a new Git repository out of your project, like transfer it to a new empty one, you delete the Git folder. Anyway, so if in SourceTree, now that I have this turned into a Git repository, you can see it lists a lot of files here. There's a bunch of stuff in library, there's all the project settings, and then we finally get into our assets. So Unity does something pretty cool every time you open a project. It generates a lot of stuff. In fact, it generates everything in the library folder. It generates everything in the temp folder as need be. It generates a lot of stuff. If I were to open one of those scripts, it would actually generate a C# project file for Visual Studio and things of that nature. So we don't need to version all of that, because whether or not it exists, Unity's going to regenerate it. And when Unity regenerates it, there's small changes, and this actually messes with version control. So we actually, not only do we not have to, we specifically want to make sure that we don't version those items. So Git has a feature that lets us ignore certain items, okay? So right now, we have every single thing selected here. And we could stage individual files, okay? And so staging is the process in Git where we say which files we want to commit. Okay, so staging, this means we stage that, means we're going to add that to our commit. And we can do that for each individual file, but if we have a lot of files, right, wouldn't we want to just stage everything with the stage all button? So we need to ignore library. All right, and this also means we're less prone to human error and things like that. And this is a really simple process. So I have a text editor open here with a git ignore file. And a git ignore file, it starts with a dot, so it's invisible, usually. A git ignore file, line by line, says what kind of files or folders Git should ignore. So these first 4 lines, these are folders. You see it's ignoring library and temp. Object and build are folders that Unity might make, or you might make to store different things, like builds. And then this asterisk dot whatever means we are going to ignore files that end like that. This asterisk means it's called a wildcard, and it says sort of handle any case, okay, that just ends in this. So these are like absolute characters. And this is just a comment that makes it a little easier to read. And there can be specific files and things like that. So there's a lot of stuff that Unity generates. This is all stuff we can ignore. This is kind of like a standard Unity ignore file. I believe this actually is potentially even the one that just comes with GitHub. GitHub has a mode for Unity projects, but we're not using GitHub. Anyway, you'll be able to see this in the Git repository after the video, but I'll make sure that this is posted separately as well. So I have this on my desktop, okay, and like I said, it's invisible. It's this file right here, and I want to go ahead and I want to move that into my Pong project folder. And now if I hop back over to SourceTree, we give this a minute. Let's see here. Let me make sure I dragged it into the right folder. I sure did. Okay. SourceTree's just being slow. Alright. If I hit stage all... Oh, hold on. SourceTree's actually like not responding to me here. I'm gonna restart it. I have freaked it out. I just freshly installed my computer, so who knows what's happening right now. Okay, there we go. Okay, so now you see that all of those library files are missing, okay? And you see git ignores in there as well. So now we're only versioning the things we want, and so long as our project settings and assets are being versioned, Unity will regenerate the things it needs. So I'm going to go ahead and now hit stage all. And now I'm going to write a commit message, and I'll just say initial commit, okay? I've set up my repository, and I want to make a version, okay? And I'm going to hit commit. And so now you see a couple things pop up. First, all this stuff disappears, and I have a new branch under branches called master. And master shows me it'll show me a list of every commit. And you can see the first one I made is initial commit. So what I want to do now is I want to push this up to my remote repository. And if we're using Bitbucket or GitHub, it's really easy, okay? All we need to do is go up to repository and hit add remote. And I want to add a new remote. And if I select host type Bitbucket here, and I type in my username, And let's see, where is it? I paste in this repository. Hit OK. And refresh. I'm now hooked up to my repository. I can go ahead and hit push. Pushing means I have my local changes, right? So you make a local repository with Git first, and then you push it to a remote central repository that syncs everybody on the project. So once you've made some commits locally, you choose to, I like to use the word inflict, because if you've made bad changes, you're now sharing them with the rest of your team. Pushing is kind of like upload, and committing is kind of like file save as, if that makes sense. If you're thinking about how you kind of share files without version control. So you may have to log in, so you just go ahead, you can type in your login info for Bitbucket. Now, Bitbucket and Atlassian have different login infos if you didn't make them the same, so be careful. And, alright, with that taken care of, just go ahead and hit refresh up here, and look at that. So, the login is what secures it so that random people can't just push to your repository, for example. And if I go over to commits, that same commit I made locally is now available here. Now, just to show that this is actually like saving stuff, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to delete my project. Right, and I am going to delete this here. And I'm going to click delete repositories on disk. And if I go here, and I'm going to delete the folder as well, just so that we are sure it is gone. There is nothing up my sleeve. I have deleted the repository. In fact, I open up Unity. You see it's disappeared out of shortcuts. So in order to clone it, okay, in source tree, I go up to clone/new again, and now I want to clone a repository instead of creating a new one. So this is pretty simple. There's a clone button on your sidebar in Bitbucket, and I do not want to clone with SSH. In this video, we're just not going to do SSH cloning. This would allow us to skip using our password and stuff like that, basically. Instead, all I want is to get this URL, all right? And I drag it, I paste it in there. I could also browse my projects on Bitbucket. This is only on accounts I've synced with my source tree tool. And you can see, again, I should have Pong on here somewhere. Oh, right, I didn't call it Pong. Basic Pong Git demo. There we go, obviously. All right, so if I hit OK, you can see it just fills in the same stuff. All right, and I want to save this into my Git, and I use this enough that I have that shortcutted. And inside here, I'm just going to make a new folder called Basic Pong Git Demo. All right, select that folder, and I go ahead and hit clone. And this shouldn't take too long. All right, great. So now if I go back into my Git folder, you can see I have it here. I have my assets folder, and it doesn't have that library folder and stuff. It's going to generate that now when I click open. All right? Let this do its work. Now, if you have a big project, this can actually take a few minutes the first time you clone it, because it's regenerating everything. But with a small project like this, it shouldn't take more than a couple seconds. So here we go. It's the same game. Nothing's changed. And that's exactly what we're looking for. But we have we have versions now. Well, we have one version. So we're going to make some more versions. We're going to make some more commits here. So, again, we see this one here. And now in my working copy, there are actually some changes. It's noticed that there are some changes in the project settings. If I actually click on this, there's really nothing there. This is a garbage change. We can commit it. We actually don't need to, though. Oh, nope, wrong button. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to organize my project here, okay? So moving files around with version control can be a little tricky. Sometimes it results in issues, typically not. But if lots of people are working on the same files at the same time, it is something to consider. You kind of want to reserve, like, restructuring your folders for some downtime when nobody's really working on it, I suppose. So I'm going to make a scripts folder. Go ahead and drag in all of my scripts into this folder. I'm going to make a scenes folder in these guys. I'm going to make a, put it in the wrong place. I'll make a prefabs folder. I will make a sprites folder. And even though the dots there is a texture, I'll put it in the sprites folder just to save some time. I forgot a script. And this ball material is actually not being used at all, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete it. Okay, and we let that go back, and I hop back over to source tree, and there is a bunch of changes. Okay, so these minuses are things they think we've removed, though we've actually moved them, and these question marks are things they're not sure about. They're new files, okay? It doesn't know what we want to do with them yet. And so if I hit stage all, you can see that it's actually now put this symbol biome, which just means that it's been moved, and our physics material has been destroyed, and the plus we have for our new meta folders. You'll notice that there is no plus button for folders, and that's because Git doesn't version folders. Unity, however, makes meta files for folders, so it's a little weird. If you have a meta file, Unity will go ahead and make that folder for you. Can be a little strange. If you make an empty folder, Git will not detect it, though. It will detect a meta file if that empty folder was made in your project. So I'm going to go ahead and hit commit here, or I'm going to type in a commit message. I'm going to say organized project. And commit. And you see now I have this one symbol on my push button here, okay? And what I'm going to go ahead and do before I push this up, I'm going to actually do something back here, and I'm going to show you something really kind of basic. Okay, so I'm going to make sure I've got it open. I'm going to create a README right in Bitbucket. So Bitbucket has this create a README button. Okay, if you don't have a README in the root of your repository, and I'll just leave it blank here, and I'll hit save. Okay, and so now if I go to commits, you can see I have basically weird things here, right? I have initial commit and the commit that Bitbucket generates when it creates your README, and I also have locally I have a different version history. Okay, so what does this mean we need to do? It means Git needs to merge these together. So if I go back over to source tree and I push, okay, I actually get an error, okay? And see, it gives me a hint. It says updates were rejected because the remote contains work that I do not have locally, all right? So what it means is that the remote repository, what's hosted on Bitbucket, has a change I don't have locally. So before I push anything, I always need to pull, okay? And when you open Bitbucket, it'll check, okay? And it'll put a 1 or a 2 or whatever, kind of like how it has on push, if there are commits that remote has that you don't. If I don't see that, I can always click refresh. If the commit's there on the website, you can definitely download it, though. So, and now you can see that Git has merged these files, all right? It's merged these commits, and now it made a new commit, and now I could roll back to either of these changes. If I wanted to see that README without my organized project, I could do that by checking this out. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to push this, hop back over here, and we are good to go. So now me pop back over to the root of the project. You see, I've got my README file. And now, Bitbucket uses Markdown files for READMEs. You can see in the auto-generated one, it actually links you to a tutorial. If you've ever made comments on like Reddit or something like that, it's a very similar idea. The website will register this as like bold or header text, that kind of thing. So README, I'm just going to say basic pong git project to demo Unity with Git. Put my name in there, and I'll just save it. Okay. And if I go back here, you can see it has my changes. And what Git does is it has a bunch of red minuses. Those are where the things were that were removed from the file, and then the greens were the added. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit commit. I'm going to say edited readme. Now here's a useful checkbox. I can always push my changes immediately to the remote repository. And right now I can't commit because I forgot to stage my file. Now that it's staged, I can go ahead and commit. With that checkbox ticked, I don't have to hit push inside source tree. However, if there are remote changes, I'll get the error, and then I'll have to push. And we just check. There it is. Okay. And if I go back to here, you can see that's how it's rendered that README file. So this is a very basic overview of Git. There are lots of stuff you can, lots of things you can do with Git, rather, and I'm going to show you just one of the things you can do with Git. Hopefully, in the near future, Unity is working on a feature called Collaborate, and hopefully this comes out very soon. This will mean Git's not really necessary, assuming that Collaborate is priced reasonably or is free. But Unity has a bunch of other services that can synchronize with your Git repository, the most notable of which is Cloud Build. So if I just Google Unity Cloud Build, okay, you can see that it has a bunch of different services, and you can activate it. This will all show you how to do there, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to log into my Unity account. Okay, and so this is my Cloud Build dashboard. I have a lot of different projects. This is the current game I'm working on. If I click this Cloud Build, I'm going to create a new project, okay? And I will call this Basic Pong Unity Cloud Test. All right, and I have my studio. This is my personal Unity account, so I will go ahead and create it for that. And what this does is I need to give it a URL for a repository. So I'm going to give it the clone URL, okay? Paste that in there, and you can see it, oh, that's the wrong repository. Again, you want to use HTTPS, and I paste it into Cloud Build, and I go ahead and hit next. You can see it auto-recognizes as Git. Now, because I made a public repository, Cloud Build doesn't need to authenticate, okay? If you have a private repository, you are going to have to use SSH, and Unity will give you something called an SSH key. I'm not going to show you how to do or use that. Unity actually has a tutorial on how to add it if need be. So once I've hooked up my repository, I can choose to build it for any platform. Let's say I hit WebGL. All right, it may take a second to load. I want to select the master branch. If you start using more advanced Git features, you might have multiple branches. Anyway, so I'm going to go to next. Here, I'm going to hit build, and it's going to kick this off. And it'll probably take a good little bit. I have Unity Plus, so it goes a little bit faster for me. The free version lets you build up to 3 things at once. But just to show you what it comes out as, let me show you the Cloud Build queue for the current project I'm working on, which is Fantasy Fairways. Fantasy Fairways, we have lots of builds, okay? So you can sort of see stats, you can see our build health. Hasn't always been the greatest. In part, that has been because Cloud Build has failed to clone our project properly. I'm not sure why that was the case, but in any event, we have lots and lots of commits. Okay, and so if I were to click on any of these, I could see what happened. I can see the log, etc., etc. You can download any of the builds. So if I went back to the beginning of time on the project, all right, well, here's far enough. I could download a build from 4 months ago. That's kind of cool. So like I said, I've done this a couple times already. Let's look at another one I've done for this Pong. You can see I did some WebGL. I can generate a link. I can share the build. All right. I copy this. Let's see where this takes me. All right. And it's WebGL build, so Unity's going to go ahead and load it for me. These games were built for widescreen resolution, so I'm going to go ahead and change that up. And it's not quite the same Pong game, but again, same general idea. And so completely remotely, Unity will start keeping track of all of the builds for you. And that's really handy. These services that game engines are starting to provide are huge boons to productivity, and the less time you have to spend building the project, the better. You can set this up to every time you make a new commit, it gets kicked off. You can collaborate with other people. It's really cool. Now, I don't want to sit here and try to sell Unity Kool-Aid the whole video, so I'll just end it here. But a cloud build takes anywhere from about 10 minutes to an hour in my estimation. It really depends. So anyway, that's an overview of Git, how it works with Unity, and how you can use it with Cloud Build. If you have any questions, you can leave a comment, you can reach out to me, etc., etc. All right, thanks.